Hey, this is an instructional video on verbs. This is from loveyourpencil.com, and this document is available for download. Just go to the website, loveyourpencil.com, and search for verb, and the document link is on the top right. Okay, so verbs. This is one of the basic parts of speech you probably learned a long time ago. And the reason why we're going through this is for something that's going to come up in a minute or two. Just read this front cover. It's very important that you understand the parts of speech. It's like a fundamental basic building block. I mean, if you were an electrician and you didn't know what wire was, I mean, that would be the same sort of thing as if you want to try to improve your writing and you don't know what verbs are. All right, you have to know verbs, nouns, adjectives, and so forth. So here we go. A verb is an action word. Now we heard this, you've heard this a long time. A verb is an action word like run, jump, play. But there are also verbs that don't indicate action, like think or see. I mean, you can be sitting there thinking, not moving, and there's still a verb applicable to what you are doing. You are actually thinking, all right, but you're not moving. But it's still a verb because it's something that you're doing. And there's something else that you probably heard. You probably heard that a verb indicates a state of being. You may wonder, well, what does that mean? Here you go. If a noun did it, does it, is doing it, or will do it, it's a verb. All right, that you know. But here we go. These are also verbs, and they are the form of the verb to be. Am, are, is, was, were, will be, would be. Those are verbs. I know that may seem kind of strange. Like if you say the sentence, I am here, am is the verb. Okay, Susan was here earlier. Was is the verb. That is actually a verb. It's one of the most it's the most common verb that you're going to say. The most common verbs you're going to say and write are verbs like am, are, is, especially is. So those are verbs. And by the way, every sentence must have a verb. Every sentence, every declarative sentence must have a verb. Okay, so here are some examples. If a noun did it, it's a verb. Remember we did the little N with the circle on the noun? We're going to do the little V with the circle above the verb to show that that's a verb. See? So, all right. Rick jumped on the table. Jumped is the verb. Rick is the noun. And then table is also a noun. Rachel and Angie sang. All right. The hurricane broke. Broke is the verb. Sang is the verb. If a noun does it, it's a verb. Birds fly. Dogs like steaks. Like is a verb. Okay, now remember I said every sentence has to have a verb. So if you see a sentence like dogs like steaks, well, dogs are nouns and steaks are nouns. And so there's only one word left, and that has to be the verb, and that's like. Mary walks 2 miles. That's the verb. If a noun is doing it, it's a verb. You can have the is-ing thing, like the candle is flickering, the bird is flying, Mary is walking. That's the verb too. All right. And if a noun will do it, it's a verb. This is talking about in the future. Jeff will wash. Honesty will get. Tomorrow it will be cloudy. Those are verbs. Also, and again, like I said, these are verbs. Right here, very important. So just make sure that you understand that those are verbs also. All right, see this here? I am educated. Am is the verb. Or the students were exhausted after the spelling bee. Were is the verb. All right, and here are some more examples. You can just read this on your own. Every verb in this paragraph has a little V over it. You can take a look at that on your own. And you're going to do what you did with nouns, which is to identify the verbs in all of these sentences, and by circling a V over every word that's a verb. Just do that for all these sentences. And then just create a short story about a dog who runs away from a bad home and is adopted by a new loving family. Just create a nice story based on that plot. And once you do, just try to fill this page. Once you do, circle all the verbs. In other words, put a V, not circle the verbs, but put a V in a circle over each verb, just to show that you know what words you wrote are verbs. And then you have some homework where you're going to do this in class, by the way. This is an in-class thing. And then this is homework where you're going to create 10 sentences and identify each verb by putting a V in a circle above each verb. Okay. Now here is something that is a common mistake, which is a problem with something called subject-verb agreement. Now, see the sentence, my mother were born in New York? See the obvious problem? Steve and Tony is good friends. Sharon are. This is called a subject-verb agreement problem. It's my mother was born. Steve and Tony are good friends. The verb in a sentence has to agree with the subject of the sentence. Okay? The three little dogs plays? No, it's the three little dogs play, not plays. So you have to make sure that your subjects and verbs agree. Just read this here. All right, and this tells you about what the subject of a sentence is. The subject of a sentence is the who or what the sentence is about. Okay, so you can read this on your own. For example, every month the moon is full. Well, moon is the subject of the sentence. Without warning, the roof collapsed. Roof is the subject of the sentence. All right, so you have to look and see which is the subject, and then you have to decide, is the subject singular or is the subject plural? And then the verb has to agree with whether the subject is singular or plural. And here we have some examples. You're gonna follow these instructions, read the sentences, figure out the subject, and then circle whether it's singular or plural. John's car is red. What is this sentence about? The sentence is about a car, not John. It's not about John. It's about John's car. Okay, so it's a singular subject. Tweety, Sylvester, and Bugs Bunny are famous cartoon characters. Who is the subject about? It's about three different cartoon characters: Tweety, Sylvester, and Bugs Bunny. So it's a plural subject because plural means more than one of something. And you're going to do that same thing. You're going to underline the subject of each one of these sentences, and then you're going to circle whether it's a singular or plural subject. And now here, this has more detail in the document than I want to go into in the video, because the video would be a little bit long. But just read this. The verbs have to agree with subjects. Just read this, and this is the key. A singular subject, the verb has an S or an ES on the end of it. For a plural subject, the verb does not have an S or an ES. The dog barks, but the dogs bark. The machine breaks down, machines break down. If it's a plural subject, there is no S at the end of the verb. It's sort of weird, like the verb is the opposite of the subject, in that if the subject has an S, the verb doesn't. If the subject doesn't have an S, the verb does. All right? And you're going to look at these problem sentences from page 8, and you're going to see these are sentences with problems in it, and here are some examples of how the subject-verb agreement problem was fixed. And what you're going to do now is you're going to follow this. You're going to do this assignment. You're going to create 5 sentences and rewrite them. First, you're going to think of 5 sentences and write them so they have a subject-verb agreement problem. So you're going to write a sentence that has a subject-verb agreement problem. And then under each sentence, you're going to rewrite it so it's correct. All right, so see this here. Here's an example. I is learning more in this class than I thought possible. So this is wrong. I is. All right, so you're going to write it so that it's correct. I am learning. Okay, because the subject of the sentence is I, and the verb that goes with I is am, not is. So you're going to write the sentence wrong in the red, and then you're going to write it correctly in the green. And this just, the whole point of this is it shows that you understand exactly how subject-verb agreement works. You do that for 5 sentences, and then all you have to do is just do this, this homework. And this is subject-verb agreement homework. And this sentence, this paragraph is full of subject-verb agreement problems. Okay? For example, here's a little hint. My dog usually bark. How do you fix that? You would have to say my dog usually barks. Alright? So you would circle barks. Or you could circle dog. You could say my dogs usually bark. See, you could fix this 2 ways. You could say my dogs usually bark more, or you could say my dog usually barks more. You could change either the subject or you could change the verb, either one. Just look through it, find the mistakes, and circle them. And then there is one other thing I want to talk about, which is verb tense. And verb tense means whether the verb is talking about what's happening now, what happened before, or what will happen. And one of the most common mistakes that writers make is to mix up past and present tense. When you write, make sure all the verbs are in the same tense. For example, here's a mistake that a lot of people make. The snow started falling heavily. Little kids played in the snow and have snowball fights. No, it's little kids played and they had, H-A-D, snowball fights. Alright, so don't do that. Don't mix verb tense like that. And you have to double check when you write to make sure that all the verbs you write are in the same tense. In most cases, when you write a story or a letter, you're going to use the past tense. Almost all the time. Alright, and here's an example of how it's corrected. And past tense often ends in ed. We call it past tense ed. And so most, not all, but most verbs in English that are in past tense end with ed. Not all, and ones that don't end with ed are called irregular verbs. And here are some examples of it. Okay, now you see this story here? This story here, this is an example, this is going to give you a way to show that you totally understand verb tense. This story here is completely in the present tense. Everything is in the present tense. He happens to look out his window to check on his new car and sees a strange woman walking close to it. He continues. See, everything is in the present tense. So for this homework, what you're going to do is you're going to rewrite it so that it occurs in the past. You're going to rewrite this present tense story so that it occurs in the past. So you see, here's an example. Gary happened to look out his window and saw, because it said sees, and so you're going to change it to saw. And once you do that, and you've changed this story to, just as here, you change the story from the present tense to the past, and you rewrote it on your homework, when you do that correctly, you know that you are an expert on verb tense. So this has been a video on verbs and subject-verb agreement and verb tense. I hope it was helpful for you. Again, you can download this whole document and reproduce it as much as you want. Hope it was helpful, and I'll see you again in another video.